Innocence lost. Pets are not for me. It is easy for a normal person to fawn and coo over the sight of small animals. Like speaking gibberish to a lonely foreigner, it's all gravy to them. Only you know the sad difference. I have never been fully able to do this in the presence of other people and always feel like a fraud when I try. So when Tia called me to announce she was leaving Pasadena on a day trip to Coronado Island and asked that I would let her dogs out so they might do their business, I was not pleased. That a dog's entire business consists solely of defecating and urinating is surely something to be envied. Beyond that, I was no great fan of these two dogs. "Are you sure I'm the right person for this job?" I inquired, begging the question. She claimed I was. The first mongrel, a knee-high toy poodle, looked up at me, hideous and spastic. Its eyes drained brown streaks of putrefactive ocular discharge and rendered its otherwise pale face raccoon-like, clownish. Its tail resembled a half-exploded stick of dynamite, a ragged tuft of bobbed hair waving about as it walked. The dog yapped incessantly. I looked on as it attempted to scrape free a bit of dangling excrement by dragging itself across the gray face of the concrete walk. Fluffy. Even the name was revolting. I renamed it Crap-Ass. The dog turned its posterior toward me and let slip a shrill yelp. "Yes," I spoke aloud, "I see the shit on your ass, but I am indifferent toward it." Crap-Ass cocked his head and looked back at me, then away, and continued to whine. The animal kingdom has yet to master the human concept of indifference. I glanced over at the second dog, as if we might look down at the vile poodle together and bond, both disgusted. The auburn-colored, long-haired chihuahua perched on the brick wall beside me, poised and calm, its prim, fox-like arms folded across each other almost regally. It occurred to me that little Katie, as my great-aunt calls her, was in fact a perfect Southern lady. I told her this, also aloud, and she beamed forward proudly, her chin raised, as though we were both seated on a porch swing in front of a massive plantation somewhere in the American South. This, however, defines the limit of my love when it comes to other people's dogs. Given my lackluster attitude toward pets, one might assume that I was never properly introduced to them as a young lad. Nothing, however, could be further from the truth. My parents, either compulsively determined to facilitate mine and my younger brother Noah's interest in domesticated creatures, or eager to occupy two flagrantly energetic children, showered us with a veritable ark of fauna. There was Prometheus, an exotic red-headed conure parrot that later became vicious and had to be given away. Jugular, a tank-bound turtle which proved stubborn, would not eat, and eventually made a convenient coffin of its own greenish shell. A thin, green, unnamed snake that lived only long enough to croak and be partially devoured by the very crickets placed in its terrarium for food. Pete Rose, my tiny white mouse, whose cage I remember one day leading my mother by the hand toward, to show her how cute he looked, sleeping. An indeterminate number of finches and canaries, and a 120-gallon aquarium filled with 20-plus fish of various size and description, all of whom slowly fell to disease before the final few resorted to cannibalism, and the aquarium was drained, removed, and replaced with a bank of translucent glass blocks. One of the earliest pets I remember, a lean, hyperactive Dalmatian named Strider, chased an encroaching dog from the property of our Craftsman Altadena bungalow, only to be mowed down by a passing car in the dead of the night. The following year, still in Altadena, my father's favorite dog, a bushy off-white Samoyed named Star Queen, had to be put down after 15 years as his companion. It was the first time I saw my father, the austere elementary school principal, with tears in his eyes. The longest-running pet we kept was Zane Grey, an all-gray mixed cat with yellow eyes named after the Western novelist who once called Altadena his home. Grey, as she became known to Noah and I, was an outdoor cat who survived multiple family moves in her 16 years of life. Grey led an entirely al fresco existence, precariously wandering our neighborhood in the foothills of Altadena, facing the constant hazard of coyotes, possums, raccoons, and other indigenous critters. The cat would disappear for days at a time and return nursing a flesh wound or trotting a captured bird across the yard. When our family moved north to the suburban climes of chaparral, scrub brush, and strip malls of Thousand Oaks, Gray adapted to a different environment that included new, human-made threats, namely a busy nearby boulevard and a public park directly behind our house. Despite the change in scenery, she thrived. Mike, our ponytailed neighbor who trained birds of prey for the Los Angeles Zoo, noticed mine and Noah's affinity for his intricate backyard aviary and gave us 2 brilliant white doves. We kept them locked in a cage outside in the backyard. Eventually, Gray became wise to their unsupervised vulnerability and began taking swipes at them, wedging her cunning paws between the bars of their imperfect enclosure. My mother, fearing that mine and my brother's neglect would result in the unfortunate deaths of our lovely doves, decided to free them, assuming that a life of potential peril in the wild was better than certain fish barrel doom. The next day, when my brother and I returned home from school, we ran toward the backyard tire swing, only to be stopped by a gruesome sight. Snowy white feathers spread freely across the grass lawn, splattered with rivulets of avian blood as though someone had violently chased and, with their bare hands, brutally murdered an angel. The doves, evidently tamed by their peaceable upbringing, decided not to fly off, and Gray, her hunting skills honed by years of outdoor scavenging, made short work of their newfound freedom. Gray met her own maker shortly thereafter, succumbing to wounds inflicted during a confrontation with Bud, the neighborhood menace, an ecru-colored pit bull who often roamed our block and was known to have bitten or chased off children on multiple occasions. My brother and I sat helplessly in the car as my father sped our dying cat to a local veterinarian. It seemed a fitting, albeit tragic end for a cat whose own life was spent in perpetual predation of other creatures, like an infamous gunslinger finally shot dead by a quicker draw. Shortly following that episode, my parents brought Noah and I a new dog, another Dalmatian, who we named Charlie Brown. Charlie was just as nimble and hyper as his predecessor and ran the backyard with the speed and dedication of a champion greyhound. My 10-year-old precociousness suited the dog's manic behavior well, and we became fast friends. During the day, I often staged a tug-of-war or played fetch in the yard, and at night, Charlie slept at the foot of my bed. 2 or 3 years later, my pediatrician diagnosed me as asthmatic, a diagnosis that would not stick, later proved false, much like the ADD, ADHD, and OCD that were later invoked in the name of my ceaseless, rambunctious energy. The first order of business was banishing Charlie from my bed at night. When the symptoms persisted, doctor's orders kept Charlie outside entirely. His fiery behavior no longer stoked, Fetch gave way to surreptitiously feeding Charlie his arthritis medication in bits of doggy treats as the dog put on weight and basically became inert, wilted, like a sun-starved houseplant. Later came Ivory, another cat, given to Noah and I by Laura, our well-meaning new stepmom, following my parents' divorce and our father's remarriage the following year. Ivory was a beautiful, appropriately named cat of indeterminate extraction, which, like so many other suburban minxes, was anonymously impregnated at a young age. Once the litter of kittens was born, Charlie, our aging Dalmatian, now arthritically hobbled, became intently concerned with Ivy's new brood. Despite her best efforts, Charlie found his way into Ivory's den and snapped up a weaning kitten, in an either ill-conceived attempt at play or a successful snack run. My father made a heroic effort to thwart Charlie, but the damage had been done. Ivy broke from the rest of her litter, retrieved the kitten, only to carefully and completely eat the salvaged youngling in an act of animal instinct that has never been fully made clear to me. One might assume that dealing with so much pet death over the years might make me more appreciative of pet life. In actuality, it really made impending death all the more usual, expected, and eventual. Like a jilted lover who raises walls around their heart after too much emotional wreckage, I too made a choice, consciously or otherwise, to fence off that warm and fuzzy place in my heart, at least with respect to pets. When my friends Brent and Zelda recently asked me to feed their 4 cats before they left to Big Bear for a few days, all it took was one comment about how their cat Beast possessed a magnificent pelt, and one follow-up question about their post-mortem plans for his remains, before they quickly apologized for imposing and made other arrangements. Pets are not for me. Recorded and produced by Scott Seiver at Loma Lada Studios.